Ever since he could remember, he had always been the quiet one at the table. Family dinners were events where voices overlapped, stories clashed, and laughter thundered across the walls, but somehow his voice never found its place in the noise. His brother always had the best grades, the loudest stories, the firmest handshake. Their father would proudly recall how his eldest closed a deal before 30, how he became vice president of a bank branch before some people even finished grad school. And when someone dared ask what the younger one was up to, the response was always followed by a pause, a shrug, or a well-practiced joke that made everyone laugh, except him. He wasn't lazy, nor was he foolish. But his world didn't revolve around traditional careers or corporate staircases. His ambitions lived in a different realm, built on late nights, the cold hum of an old laptop, and the unshakable belief that something bigger was possible. He had ideas, dozens of them, scribbled in worn-out notebooks, saved in endless folders on his desktop, but they all met the same end: rejection, silence, or worse, mockery. When he tried launching his first startup, he drained his savings and maxed out a credit card. His family didn't ask what happened when he moved back home for a while, they just assumed he had failed again. The second venture was quieter. No one even knew about it. He worked double shifts to fund it and coded through the night. Two collapsed. This time the silence was louder than any criticism. It was as though they had collectively decided to erase his efforts from memory. His father stopped asking entirely. His mother only mentioned his brother's milestones during their weekend calls. He had become invisible in the very house that raised him. Despite everything, he never stopped building. Every humiliation became fuel. Every ignored update another reason to push forward. He read, studied, tore apart business plans, taught himself things most people paid thousands to learn. He found solace in forums filled with strangers who understood, who were also chasing dreams in silence. He started freelancing, small jobs at first, then slowly moved up to projects that paid enough to cover rent and ramen noodles. But he never told his family. What was the point? His brother, with his slick suits and perfect Instagram posts, became the family symbol of success. At every gathering, their father would beam when someone mentioned the eldest's name. "That's how you do it," he'd say. "Head down, work hard, climb the ladder." Every sentence a dagger dressed in pride. No one ever asked about the younger son sitting quietly nearby, smiling politely, hiding his exhaustion and ambition behind a calm face. One summer, after another failed funding pitch and a particularly cold call with a dismissive investor, he returned home for a weekend barbecue. The table was the same. The voices were the same. His role hadn't changed. His brother showed off pictures of his new house, spoke of promotions and leadership retreats. Their father listened, nodding with approval, occasionally glancing at the younger one, offering a tight-lipped smile that said, "You'll get there someday," though no one really believed it. He left early that night. As he walked through the quiet neighborhood, hands buried deep in his hoodie, he promised himself that next time would be different. He had an idea, one that felt stronger than the rest. It was a product people needed, built on problems he saw firsthand while freelancing. He began sketching wireframes the next morning. Days bled into nights, and he stopped answering calls that only led to more polite pity. A few months later, he applied to a small but reputable startup incubator. He didn't tell a soul. When he got in, he didn't celebrate, just kept working. He met his co-founder, hired 2 interns, and found a coffee shop that stayed open late so they could run meetings without paying rent. His life became a blur of caffeine, rejection emails, moments of quiet triumph, and the ever-present voice in the back of his mind whispering that he would never be good enough, not to them. But still he kept going. Because for the first time his vision wasn't just an idea, it was taking shape. People started signing up. Clients started talking. And beneath all the pressure, for the first time in years, he felt like he was moving forward. Still, when his brother called to casually mention a new promotion, and their mother chimed in to say how proud they were of the banker, he said nothing. He smiled, told them he was keeping busy, and hung up. The weeks that followed were unlike anything he had experienced before. Where once there had been silence and self-doubt, now there was momentum, measured in emails, calls, demos, and meetings that stretched late into the night. The product was no longer just a concept sketched in a coffee shop. It had turned into a functioning platform. It wasn't perfect, but it worked, and that alone felt revolutionary. With his co-founder handling outreach and logistics, he immersed himself in the code, in the architecture of systems that had the potential to scale. There was barely time to sleep, let alone think about the past, but late at night, when his screen glowed in the darkness, he would sometimes picture his father's face, half proud, half condescending, and quietly wonder if he would ever be good enough in their eyes. The first big break came unexpectedly. A mid-level executive from a reputable firm stumbled across their platform through a mutual contact and scheduled a call. She wasn't effusive, just curious, but the question she asked made it clear she understood the potential. Within 2 weeks, they had signed their first serious contract. It wasn't a fortune, but it was legitimacy. It meant investors would start paying attention. And they did. The next few weeks blurred into a chaos of pitch decks, elevator speeches, beta testing, bug fixes, and the endless loop of refining everything, from user experience to their financial projections. His co-founder was the talker, the charmer, the one who could convince anyone to listen. He, on the other hand, remained the quiet force behind the scenes, making sure that what they promised actually worked. Together they made progress. But he never updated his family. Not even once. He hadn't forgotten the years of silence, the way his brother laughed at his little internet businesses, or the time his mother kindly suggested he try for a real job at a local office, just until things stabilize. They didn't know about the incubator. They didn't know about the product, the team, or the traction they were building. And he didn't think they deserved to, not yet. But one thing he couldn't avoid was the upcoming family gathering. It was his father's birthday, and the whole extended family was expected. Normally, he would have found a way out, claimed work or illness, but this time was different. His co-founder had just informed him that one of the major venture capital firms had shown interest in a pre-seed round. The potential valuation? Higher than anything he had ever imagined. It wasn't real yet, not finalized, but it was close. Close enough that he could walk into that room with his head held higher than he ever had before. Still, he didn't know if he wanted to. The thought of sitting at that old table, listening to the same jokes, the same hierarchy of success, with his name once again left out, it twisted something in his chest. He didn't want to prove anything anymore. But he also couldn't deny the quiet hunger that remained inside him. He didn't want praise. He wanted recognition. He wanted them to see the version of him that had clawed his way out of anonymity, that had built something meaningful with nothing but time, risk, and grit. The day of the gathering arrived. He dressed casually, no suit, no watch, just a clean shirt and his usual jeans. He knew his brother would be there, probably in a tailored blazer, maybe with a new girlfriend in tow. He knew the uncles would brag about promotions, and the aunts would compliment one another's children on their degrees, weddings, babies. He drove there slowly, rehearsing nothing, because he wasn't planning to say anything unless asked. As he stepped into the house, nothing had changed. The same framed photos lined the hallway. The same scent of polished wood and roasted meat lingered in the air. His mother greeted him with a hug, surprised to see him. His father nodded from the living room, already engaged in deep conversation about markets and returns. His brother, as expected, had the floor, retelling a story about a deal he closed just last week. The room was full of laughter. And once again, he found his place near the edge of the conversation. He observed quietly, speaking when spoken to, smiling politely when old family friends asked what he was up to these days. He gave vague answers. Just some tech work, mostly remote. No one probed. No one seemed especially interested. And yet, beneath the surface, something was shifting. He knew it. In his pocket was a simple envelope, one he had brought on instinct more than anything else. Inside was a printed document with the most recent valuation term sheet they'd received. It wasn't public yet, but it was real. As the evening wore on, conversations turned to investments, stocks, tech startups. Buzzwords floated through the air from mouths that only knew them from headlines. Someone mentioned a recent IPO that had skyrocketed. Another uncle lamented not buying early. And suddenly he realized this was his world now, not theirs. His. He understood the back end, the burn rate, the acquisition channels. They only knew the numbers on the news. And for the first time, he didn't feel like a failure. He felt like someone holding a secret. When dessert was served, His father made a toast. As always, it centered on success, family, and the importance of hard work. His brother was singled out again. The room clapped. Glasses clinked. And then, as silence settled, his father looked toward him. There was that same familiar glance, tinged with uncertainty and low expectations. A casual, almost dismissive question followed. Something about still doing freelance stuff? He smiled, stood slowly, and placed the envelope on the table without a word. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. The momentum carried him forward with a kind of force he had never experienced before. What began as scattered nights of coding and quiet ambition was now something tangible: contracts, clients, and a growing team. Each day brought a new challenge, but with it, a new affirmation that he was no longer just building in the shadows. He was architecting something real. The office was modest, a shared co-working space in a converted warehouse that smelled faintly of coffee and old books, but it was theirs. Inside those walls, something was being shaped that none of them could yet fully comprehend. The energy was raw, kinetic, pulsing with the nervous excitement of those who know they're standing on the edge of something greater than themselves. He had become more than just a developer. He was a founder now. The roles blurred and titles meant little. 1 hour he would be debugging a server issue, the next reviewing marketing copy, and then jumping into a call with a potential investor across time zones. Sleep became a luxury. Meals were rushed or forgotten entirely. But none of it felt like sacrifice, it felt necessary. There was no plan B. Everything he had was poured into this venture. With early traction came attention. Minor blogs started to notice their product. Tech Twitter whispered their name. A few influencers in niche circles mentioned the platform casually, and signups began to tick upward. His co-founder, ever the strategist, pushed for growth. They raised a small angel round, just enough to expand the team to 5 people and cover 6 months of burn. It wasn't flashy, but it was enough to keep building. Investors began circling. The same ones who had ignored or dismissed his earlier pitches were now requesting meetings. Polite emails arrived from people who once couldn't be bothered to reply. It was vindication, but he didn't allow himself to savor it. Not yet. The startup world was ruthless. Hype meant nothing if the product failed to deliver. So he doubled down. The team pulled 12-hour days, pushing feature after feature, refining the user interface, fixing every edge case. They were obsessed, and he was at the center of it, spinning like gravity. And yet, for all the success, he remained silent toward his family. The calls from his mother still came, asking if he was eating, if he needed help paying rent. He always reassured her with half-truths. His father never called. His brother occasionally sent photos from exotic vacations, captions filled with subtle jabs disguised as jokes. He ignored them all. There was nothing left to prove to them. Not yet. The office changed. The team upgraded from fold-out chairs to ergonomic setups. They hired a part-time office manager, and for the first time, someone brought in fresh fruit and snacks. It felt surreal. He would sometimes sit alone late at night after everyone left, the glow of monitors reflecting on the glass, and let himself breathe. In those moments he allowed a quiet hope to stir. Maybe it would work. Maybe he wasn't crazy. Then came the offer. A well-known VC firm, one of the ones he used to dream about while scrolling through Crunchbase at 3 a.m., reached out. The partner had read about their growth in a newsletter and wanted a call. The meeting was professional, focused, respectful. There was no condescension. No half-hearted interest. They understood the vision. Within a week the term sheet arrived. It was real. A valuation higher than anything he had dared to speak aloud. More than numbers, it was validation, a confirmation that he hadn't just been playing at business, that this wasn't a fluke. They were willing to bet real capital on him, on what he had built with his own hands. He printed the term sheet, placed it in a folder, and stared at it in silence. He didn't tell his team right away. He wanted to be sure it wasn't a dream. Negotiations followed. Diligence, legal reviews, tense discussions about board seats and equity splits. He had to learn fast how to protect himself, how to think 5 years ahead, how not to get swallowed whole by the very thing he had created. He hired a lawyer, one who had represented founders in major exits. She was sharp, relentless, and believed in his instincts. She helped him retain control, structure the deal, and prepare for what came next. They closed the round. The announcement was small but effective. A short press release. A few interviews. Suddenly, everyone in the industry knew their name. Emails flooded in. Recruiters, journalists, potential partners. Competitors started watching closely. They had entered a new arena. The stakes were higher. So was the pressure. But even then, he said nothing to his family. He didn't update them on social media. He didn't send the article link when TechCrunch featured their story. He didn't return his brother's casual text, asking if he was still doing freelance web stuff. He watched from a distance as they continued living in a version of reality where he didn't matter, where his story hadn't changed. He let them live in that world a little longer, because he knew a moment was coming, one where they wouldn't be able to ignore him, one where the ticker symbol on the stock exchange would display not just letters but legacy. And when that moment arrived, they would realize he had never needed their validation, only his own. The months that followed the funding round marked a shift, not just in the company's trajectory, but in him. There was a quiet transformation taking place, almost imperceptible at first, but steady and irreversible. Where once he had worked from corners and co-working spaces, he now walked through glass doors etched with the name of a company he had built from the silence of obscurity. Every desk, every server, every new hire was an extension of that once lonely idea he had carried like a secret. They grew fast. The funding allowed them to hire senior developers, a proper design team, operations staff, and even a product manager who had worked for a household name app. Meetings became more structured. Slack channels buzzed at all hours. Calendars filled with color-coded calls, board meetings, PR strategies, user growth reviews, and roadmap sessions. He no longer wrote every line of code, but his fingerprints were still on every major decision. People looked to him not just for direction but for vision. And yet, amidst the whirlwind of traction and media attention, he remained grounded in ritual. He still came in early, still stayed late. He sat with junior engineers, reviewed builds, tested prototypes with obsessive precision. The walls of the new office bore early sketches, pinned side by side with user feedback. Every milestone was celebrated modestly. No champagne, no rented cars. Just long exhalations and quiet pride. Still the past lingered. His family remained a closed chapter he hadn't reopened. He didn't resent them, not anymore. Resentment required emotional investment. What he felt was distance, like looking through glass at people who once defined his worth. He knew they didn't follow the industry. They wouldn't recognize the articles, wouldn't understand the capital raised, or the significance of scaling a team past 30 people. To them, unless something was on the news or the stock ticker, it wasn't real. And so he waited. The day he received the call from the media firm covering new IPO candidates, he felt nothing at first. It was too early, just inquiries, just interest. But it lit a fuse. He reached out to his lawyer, who confirmed what he had suspected. The numbers, the growth, the cap table, they were ready to prepare. It wouldn't happen tomorrow. But the gears were turning. The roadmap to a public listing, once a fantasy scribbled in notebooks, now had checkpoints and real dates. His team didn't know yet. Only his lawyer, his co-founder, and the CFO they'd hired from a competitor. Together, they worked silently, diligently, building a pipeline of strategic planning. Lawyers reviewed regulations. Banks weighed valuation options. He spent nights reading SEC filings from similar companies, studying missteps, absorbing every nuance. Not because he had people for that now, but because he still carried the burden of being underestimated. He imagined what it would feel like. The day their name would flash on business channels, scrolling beneath the news as anchor voices read market updates. He imagined someone from his family catching it accidentally, pausing, replaying, unsure if they'd heard correctly. He didn't want to tell them. He wanted them to find out with the rest of the world. That feeling only intensified when an invitation arrived in his inbox. A conference panel. A global tech summit. He was to speak alongside names he had once watched from afar, CEOs of billion-dollar companies, founders with memoirs and documentaries. It was validation at a different scale. He accepted, not for the exposure, but for the quiet victory it symbolized. On the flight there, he didn't rehearse. He sat by the window watching clouds drift past, thinking of every room he had once sat in, silent and forgotten. When he took the stage, cameras flashed. The room was full. Questions were thoughtful, precise. He spoke with calm authority, not to impress but to explain. When asked about early struggles, he offered no bitterness. Only facts. Every failure had been part of the architecture. Every doubt, internal and external, had been material. He didn't speak of family. There was no need. After the summit, the media attention exploded. Clips circulated online. Articles quoted him. Emails flooded in. Investors offered ridiculous sums to get in before the listing. His CFO advised patience. The timeline was solid. The valuation was rising. Lawyers prepared confidential paperwork. It was happening. And then one evening, as he sat reviewing a late design prototype, an assistant walked into his office with a puzzled expression. A reporter had reached out to verify a detail. His company had been named in a segment set to air during a primetime business news broadcast. It was already scheduled. No turning back. He nodded. He went home early that night, something he rarely allowed himself. He ordered takeout, sat on the couch in the dark and waited. The channel logo flashed. Segments rolled by: markets, crypto, energy updates. Then came the feature. 5 companies redefining the digital future, preparing for public debut. He was the last name on the list. His face on screen. His company name beneath it. The valuation in bold. And next to it the ticker code. He watched in silence, emotions swirling beneath the surface. Not joy. Not pride. Something deeper. Completion. The moment wasn't cinematic. It was still. Sharp. Clear. Somewhere he imagined his family might be watching. Maybe his brother flipping through channels. Maybe his father sipping tea in the living room. He didn't care if they understood the numbers. He just hoped they recognized the name. It was his. The days following the televised segment moved like a silent tide, relentless and irreversible. His inbox swelled with invitations, partnership requests, and congratulations from people he hadn't spoken to in years. The team was buzzing, the office humming with energy, but he remained composed, almost detached. There was no big announcement made internally, no victory lap, no speech. The milestone had arrived exactly as he envisioned it. Publicly, powerfully, and quietly. It was no longer a question of whether he had succeeded. Now it was simply a matter of how far he would go from here. The calls from media outlets intensified. Some wanted interviews, others wanted exclusive angles. His lawyer managed most of it. His co-founder filtered the noise. He stayed focused on product. He always did. But something had changed. His name was no longer met with confusion or skepticism in meetings. Investors deferred to him. Peers referenced him in conversation. At conferences, people waited after his talks just to shake his hand. It was new territory, alien and, at times, hollow. He had spent so long fighting to be seen that he never stopped to consider what it would feel like once they finally looked. One afternoon he opened his phone and scrolled through the contacts he hadn't touched in years. Names from old schools, co-workers from temp jobs, even a few distant cousins who had once laughed behind his back. Messages had started trickling in, some cautious, others effusive. A former classmate congratulated him as if they had been close. An old neighbor asked if he was hiring. He read each one carefully but replied to none. His past had its place, and it didn't belong in the engine room of what he was building now. And then came the message from his brother. It arrived late at night. Short. Casual. It mentioned the segment. Said he looked well. It asked if they could catch up sometime. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of years of condescension, no hint of regret. Just a simple question dressed in polite language. He stared at the screen for a long time. The silence between them stretched back further than he could measure. He closed the message without responding. He had changed. Not just in title or status but in how he carried the weight of things. Before, every comment, every dismissal, every oversight had left a mark. Now they barely scratched the surface. He realized he no longer craved their approval. He didn't want to show them anything. They had already seen enough. And they had looked away. Still, curiosity lingered. He wondered what his father had thought. Whether his mother had watched the broadcast. Whether anyone in the family had said his name out loud for once without adding an asterisk. There was no call from them. No email. Just the stillness of old habits and the echo of all the years they hadn't believed in him. One weekend, he received a formal invitation to a family event. A wedding, distant but not irrelevant. He considered ignoring it. Then he reconsidered. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about closure. About showing up on his own terms, not as the silent background figure, but as the man he had become. He RSVP'd. No +1. No explanation. Just his name. The day of the wedding was sunny, warm, and strangely calm. He arrived late, slipped into a seat at the back of the venue, and watched as people turned slowly, recognizing him one by one. Their expressions shifted, some surprised, others uncertain. Whispers followed him like a second shadow. He didn't care. He wasn't there for spectacle. He stayed through the ceremony, spoke to almost no one, and left before dinner. But in those brief moments, he saw it in their eyes. The question, the reckoning, the sudden realization that the version of him they had built in their minds no longer existed. Back at the office, things accelerated. Pre-IPO planning entered its final phase. His CFO managed the financials with ruthless precision. The legal team worked through regulatory checklists. The board aligned on timing. Everything pointed toward one day in the near future when their company's name would scroll across every major exchange. When every doubt, every insult, every casual dismissal would be met with silence, because the numbers would say it all. He moved through it with discipline but also with a quiet sense of separation. The world celebrated him now, but he had long since stopped needing to be celebrated. His hunger wasn't for attention, it was for building, for refining, for pushing the boundary of what he thought possible. Recognition was a side effect, not a destination. On a rainy evening just before final regulatory filing, he found himself alone in the office. The lights were dim, the city outside slick with reflection. He walked to the window, coffee in hand, and looked out over the skyline. Somewhere out there, his family lived their lives, unchanged in rhythm but perhaps shifted in perspective. He didn't hate them. He didn't even blame them anymore. They had simply never understood what he was becoming. They hadn't known how to support what they couldn't define. Now they did. And he, finally, was free of the need to be understood. The day the company went public began with a strange quiet. There was no fanfare in his apartment, no champagne, no audience. Just him standing alone in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of a shirt he had owned for years. He didn't wear the expensive tailored suit his assistant had prepared. Instead, he chose simplicity, a clean button-up, worn jeans, and the same black shoes he used to wear to pitch meetings no one took seriously. It wasn't superstition. It was memory, a reminder of the weight behind this moment. At the stock exchange, cameras lined the lobby. Reporters milled around trying to catch a quote, a glance, anything that could add color to the story already breaking across financial media. Their startup had been labeled one of the most anticipated IPOs of the quarter. Analysts speculated on price, market cap, competitive edge. People who had never known his name now attached it to words like visionary, disruptor, founder. He heard none of it. His mind moved inward, circling the years that had brought him to this point. The sleepless nights, the silent humiliation, the long walks home after failure. All of it had led here. When he entered the main floor, the team was already gathered. His co-founder gave a nervous smile. Some of the original engineers, now team leads, stood nearby, eyes shining with disbelief. It was real now. The screens on the wall lit up with their ticker symbol. The final price was confirmed. The valuation surpassed their projections. He was no longer building a company. He was leading a publicly traded enterprise. But as the bell rang, as confetti rained and cameras flashed, he didn't smile. Not out of coldness but clarity. The milestone wasn't the end. It wasn't even the peak. It was just another transformation, another door opening. The real work began now, bigger, faster, riskier. The pressure would grow. The scrutiny would multiply. But he had already survived the worst part, being ignored. After the ceremony, he skipped the celebration. He returned to his office, bigger now, minimalist, silent. He removed his watch, placed it on the desk, and sat in the chair overlooking the skyline. It was still raining. The city looked different now, but only slightly. He knew the view hadn't changed. He had. He reached into the drawer and pulled out a photo, faded, taken during one of those old family dinners. He looked at the faces, the casual expressions, the distance between them and the version of himself they could never quite understand. He set it down gently and exhaled. Later that evening, he attended a private dinner hosted by investors and key executives. There were toasts, laughter, cautious optimism about what came next. But even among the elite, he remained silent. He had learned that words meant little compared to presence, to proof. Everything they needed to know about him was already in the market cap, the product, the persistence. The final moment came without warning. A message appeared on his phone, this time from his father. Not a question, not a call, just a sentence. Simple, direct, 5 words. He read them once, then again. He didn't respond, not out of anger, but because the silence finally spoke for him. In the weeks that followed, coverage continued. Magazines published profiles. He was invited onto panels, offered book deals, asked to mentor rising founders. He declined most of it. He had no interest in legacy as entertainment. His team expanded. Offices opened in new cities. He rarely went to the headquarters anymore. He worked from quiet spaces, always thinking, always building. And then one morning he walked into a room full of new hires, young, driven, unscarred by the journey. They looked at him with awe, expectation. He stood before them, hands in pockets, unsure how to begin. Then finally he spoke. Not about success, not about money, not about how to win, but about the silence. About being overlooked, ignored, misunderstood. About how those things can either bury you or become your foundation. They listened. And as he left the room, he realized something had shifted again. He wasn't just a founder. He wasn't just a name on a screen. He had become a symbol. Not of genius or innovation, but of quiet endurance. Of what it means to keep going long after everyone stops believing. Outside, the city moved on. Crowds rushed, taxis honked, lights flickered. He blended in, just another figure in motion. But somewhere above, on a building tall enough to scrape the sky, his company's name glowed in steel and neon. It was there now. Permanent. Inevitable. Just like he had always been.